Okay, so thank you for joining us, Niall. We are talking about SEO optimization on our all remote content guides, which we created a lot of, and now we're going back and sort of working to improve them. So I was just hoping that you could run through what you found when you looked through these and sort of tell us what your discoveries were, and then go through some recommendations.
Yeah, no problem at all. I'll just quickly share my screen. So initially, the first thing I just began to look at is what were the quick levers we could pull for fixes based on performance. And initially, there was kind of three areas that I was looking at. One was our click-through rate from organic search. So basically, this is what I like to classify as your kind of shop windows. This is the first thing people see when they search for a specific query in amongst all the other 10 results on page one, and you're kind of fighting to get that click. And the main influences that will provide that click or not provide that click is your meta description and your title tag. So for example, just on one of the ones we done a trial run optimization on, we could see that the click-through rate was fairly low compared to the number of impressions it was getting over a 3-month period. So then what I did was just basically look at how we can optimize the title tag and the meta descriptions just to make it more enticing and to maximize the real estate. So usually you can, in terms of title tags, you can use up to 60 characters. I think it's about maybe 160 or so then for your meta description. So even if you view some of these here, for example, you can see these are the meta descriptions for some of these guys, which is a benefit of operating a remote company. So out of 160 characters, which you can influence a click, it's important to kind of maximize that and use terminology that's enticing and also includes kind of phrases related to what that query would be, but most likely, or most importantly, explains the content in the page and how it's a solution to what the user is looking for. So that's one of the first areas that can give a kind of a quick win and a boost in terms of organic traffic. So I done some rewrites here. We can test those again anyway. The second thing then to look at is obviously the on-page elements. So these are pages that are already live and created. So it's a little bit different from doing an initial SEO strategy for a new production process. So to do that, basically, I've done an audit of the heading structures on the page and then analyze it against key terms ranking on the page and related to the topic that we're obviously discussing on the page. So the idea was to tie in some of those terms in key headings that will provide a description of what's being provided on the page, but also indicate the search engines, the relevancy of the content of the page to the overall topic. So that's where you can see some of these suggestions were made just to include, we say, the asynchronous terminology and stuff in what would have been a kind of a kind of, not a bland heading, but a non-descriptive for the overall topic. The reason for this is it's the difference between users and search engines. So when a search engine crawls a page, it crawls through the heading structures and the title tags and takes terminology as well as the context of the copy on the page to understand the relevancy of both the intent of the content and in what type of search it will deliver as an answer, and also to match it to a query of a searcher. So it's just those little things we try and tweak to ensure we're getting the right content in front of the right users at the right time. But also, if we can add those terms, for example, if we have a page where we're ranking in position 11 for a term, this is just, for example, asynchronous, but we know it's a high search volume term. And if we can tweak the page a little bit to increase that positioning, then we can get a higher number of clicks and a higher number of search results. So it's kind of a number of different factors that we try and kind of activate to try and increase the overall performance of the page.
So if I understand this correctly, so the first thing that you were showing us, this is like how it shows up in search results. So you have the title, which is the bolded text that you see, and then you have the meta description, which is the little subtext, right? And so that is for users, like that's for people who are viewing it and we're trying to get them to click. And then the second brief that you're showing us, this is for the search engine. And so this sort of demonstrates for the search engine that we have this content and that it is authoritative. It covers all of these different topics. And so when people search for those related terms, that's what it ends up showing them this result. Is that right?
Exactly. So like any page, when you create a page and you launch it, the first thing that a search engine does once it interacts with it is it will crawl it and it will index that page. And in order to index that page and identify what to deliver as a result for, it will process the context of the content of the page. And you could do that with all the content of the page, but it usually targets headers and subheaders as a really good, strong indicator of the context of the page, of the topics being covered, and how deeply it's being covered. So, for example, one of the workarounds we do is if we analyze a page and we see, for example, the pages for the remote guides are very extensive, they're very content heavy, so they're very good. It's not like we can say, okay, they need more content. Instead, what we look for is there gaps in the content? So in that respect, we would look at what are other queries, related queries, what are called PA or PPA, people also ask PA, that aren't covered on this, and we could include them. So we're increasing the coverage and the expertise of the content. And the second bit then is to look, as you're saying, the keywords, which are based on, we can indicate search volume for these terms and how they're related in terms of the content of the page, and try and tweak this so it is more optimized. We call it pre-optimize the headings and subheadings for these terms to increase the probability of these being delivered for a targeted search result type. So yeah, so that's a fairly correct summary. One of the third things then that I look at is the internal linking. So this is another important factor, because if you consider we have a lot of remote related blog content, for example, and then we have the guides and those other sections in the other part of the website. So the idea was to identify what the guide was about, then audit the blogs and see if we have a couple of articles related to the same thing on remote, and then create a link structure from the blog page to the remote guide page. And this kind of has a number of impacts. One is it provides a user journey path. So instead of someone reading a blog, you generally have a really high bounce rate in a blog because it's kind of top of the funnel or pre-awareness. So usually they bounce and come back later on. But if we can provide that interlinking page path, there's a good chance they click into the guide because it's so tightly related. And that once again gets you traffic. The second branch of that is, once again, back to the crawler, search engine crawl your guide, then they'll crawl the interlinking content. And that once again feeds into what the algorithm looks for, which is called EAT. So it's expertise, authority, and trust. So the more you have a core page, we'd say, around the guide, and the more you have other pages like blogs, etc., that cover other elements of it and all tying together, they see that as like a knowledge cluster. So they know, okay, if a couple of pages are competing with each other, you have a competitor who provides the same information, but you can provide a way wider context through what you have on offer, they will deliver you as the result. So that's another way we tend to look at it.
So does it help that we're then cross-linking to other guides in that sense, if they have such similar, even if it's not through blogs, it's like we have lots of cross-links to different pieces within the guides. So that's also helping in this sense?
Yeah, it would. So like that's how search engines identify the correlation, the relationship between content, is they'll follow those links. So two important factors is what you're linking to, but also the anchor text. So what wording you use as the link, because that's how they get the context of the relationship between the two pieces of content. So that's what you'll hear people say in optimized anchor text. So it's ensuring that we try and stay away from short abbreviation terms, but something that gives a good context of what it's linking to is the strongest form of anchor text you can use.
Cool. Thank you. This is fascinating.
There's a lot there. So if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to run back over anything.
So if we go back to the brief that you showed us.
Yeah.
So there's some work that I already did with a merge request where I was just, updating these headers. But can you talk to us a little bit about the new content? You added some stuff in here, and that's like, it seems like we're going to need to write some new content to go with that. Is that correct?
Yeah, so that comes back to the gap analysis I was discussing. So usually what we'll do there is we'll find kind of related subtopics or queries. What we said earlier was called PA, so people also ask. So you can crawl the search engine such as Google and you can put in your main query for the page, and it will provide a list of results. So you'll see in the box that the results does kind of drop down sometimes when you're doing a search of other related questions. So what it does is it just correlates other queries that people ask related to the initial query. So once again, if we can build those into the content, because it is such a content heavy page, and it's not like it's lacking a lot, but it means we're just looking for gaps that we can put additional content in that kind of increases the expertise and authoritativeness of that page.
Is there anything we need to think about when we're writing that? Do we need to think about like putting in keywords related to that, or do we just write the content that's appropriate for that question?
Well, you see, we're at the stage now where the algorithm for the search engines are fairly advanced, so they can understand the context of copy in a page and understand the intent relationship and all that very well. So we're not as relied as we would have been in the olden days of like keyword placements. You have to have a keyword placement here, you have to have a keyword placement there. But even saying that, it is best to still try and have, like, for example, a heading. If you have a certain paragraph about something, have the keyword in the heading for that structure. I would still try and place the keyword, if possible, near the start of the paragraph. It's not 100% necessary, but I still find it's going to be a beneficial tweak. And variations of the term. So I think another important thing is not to focus on the primary keyword itself. So you can have it in the sort of H2 if you want to cover a subtopic of asynchronous, like internal communication or something related to it. Then have the heading in the H2, but to have other related terms. So what other queries or terms or topics are around this? So the more you can cover a topic and the broader you can be in it, obviously the better off you are. But at the end of the day, I think this stage, with the advancement of the technology of search engines, it's more to do with the quality of the content and the coverage and how much authority you have in delivering it. So they're the things you kind of trying to build over time. And luckily, I think GitLab, I think we're in a strong position with those already. So it's a thing of maintaining and just having a good kind of production and maintenance schedule after that, I would say.
That's good. I like that better than the sort of old keyword stuffing angle of things. It's definitely better to just write good content that we agree with and we believe in. So I like that a lot. Thinking about creating content going forward. So we had a conversation about this, and Betsy was talking about, okay, I'm about to create a new guide. So what should be our process when we're creating brand new content?
It depends on the approach you want to take. So most, I suppose, the most formatted would be like if you have a production cadence, so you're going to be producing 2 articles per month or whatever way you want to do it, is to first of all maybe create a content calendar and say, okay, here is the topics we want to be recognized as leaders in. So then you have the areas and the topics you want to own, and then from that we would do a little bit of research to find, okay, what are the related kind of content or we would need to create around this to build authority. So for example, do we need to create top of the funnel? So should we create 2 or 3 blogs? And then would we create a guide as a core page that we link these to? And that would give us a kind of a funnel structure, I suppose, if you want to look at it that way. And also help us build authority, because we're covering a lot of the 3 or 4 main primary queries, as well as providing a really strong, solid guide source around that. And from that, once we have mapped out what you want to produce, we would look to create a little brief that would just create maybe the 3 or 4 keywords or 5 keywords you want to target on that page, and maybe a listing of some of the topics or headings that you can provide. Just like that wouldn't be all you'd have to provide. That would just provide you a list of things you can include, but that would be based on us analyzing what are the top ranking content on this and what have they got. So we know that it gives us a strong starting position. Okay, we can include this, and then you can add all the other elements you want to yourselves, but we just try and cover those core basics anyway.
That's great. That's really helpful. And I do have an epic that I'm using for each quarter to kind of outline the guides that I want to accomplish going forward. So like for this quarter, I just created an issue about a guide for how to do internal comms in a remote setting. So it's, probably not going to be one of our top topics, but it's still, I want to make sure I'm doing it in a way that is optimized. So what's the best way for your team? Should I loop you into that issue, or should I create a separate issue specifically for the SEO side of that?
I'd say just tag me on the issue and
Okay.
I'll review it, and I can, once I get an idea of what you're going after in the core terms, I can
Awesome.
open an issue myself and just maybe create a keyword list.
Okay.
Usually what we do is, if there's a big project, for example, if we were going after version control, or if there was a core term, I would launch an initial keyword research process to identify all the variations of that term, long tail, short term, queries, questions, and then we could break them down by intent stage. So we'd say, is it informational? Is it commercial investigation?
Okay.
Is it navigational, or is it transactional? So basically they're the kind of 4 stages of your funnel or your buyer journey stage. And we can map each one of them to a type of content. So if it's informational, it's going to be top of the funnel. It's going to be blog. It's going to be like how to use version control, for example. So we know people are only beginning to interact with the topic, so they're looking for basic information. If it's commercial investigation, it's going to be more kind of proof of concept information, more technical. And then if it's going towards transactional, it's going to be bottom of the funnel. It's going to be very targeted at processing conversion, etc. So it'll be a little bit different because of what the content you're trying to produce. It's not kind of exactly tied into the product-based content, but it feeds into that journey. But it just means we can isolate the keywords and the topics that you can target per stage, but it just makes it easier for you to get an idea of the elements of the topic you can cover, depending on where you place the content.
So in that case, it would probably be more helpful to loop you in there long before having the MR for you to actually review, because that way you can say, here are the topics we need to include before the actual content gets drafted.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. So the idea is, I'd always promote a content first approach. I'm always like, creating good content is always the way to go. But if you can inform that production based on a bit of data, it's always a little bit better.
Okay, great. This is really helpful. Thank you.
So that was really interesting for me that you mentioned you can sort of like identify what stage people are at. Like our content, we generally just think of it as awareness, top of funnel stuff. But would you have the ability to identify if we have any pieces of content that are further down the funnel? Because those might be conversion opportunities for us, or we could direct people towards the product. Yeah.
So like a lot of I used to do a process manually. I created this a formula in a spreadsheet. It took me ages. It was really long. And what I used to do is I could export all the keywords and then drag and drop, and it would break them out into different informational or whatever the stages were. But one of the primary pieces of software we use now, luckily only last week, actually integrated this with their own, with the research software. So it actually automates this in the tool itself. So what I could actually do, which might help, or might at least provide some information, is I could look at the specific folder you house the remote content in, and it should give me an idea of what's your ratio of terminology, but also what pages are kind of heavier weighted towards which. So that could feed into what you're looking for. And the idea of targeting the content towards stage is usually like, for example, if you were going to create a piece of content that is like how to implement remote working strategies. So that's kind of top of the funnel awareness. But if you were trying to implement something that was more conversion or commercial investigation, if it was tied towards kind of conversion or something, might be something along the lines of tying in the content to the benefits of the tool itself. So how the GitLab tool makes remote working possible due to something else, and then tying the terminology to that. So it's more kind of conversion based, but it's a little bit more technical, but I'm happy to run through that a little bit deeper once we start getting to the actual keyword mapping process.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's sort of like we'll explore that in the future, I think, but it's good to know that that's an option. I didn't have any other questions. Did y'all have more questions?
I think I'm set. I just appreciate it, and I'm excited to see where this takes us. So thank you so much for walking through it.
No, I have one question. If we've been talking about content in the form of handbook guides, if we are talking about creating blogs, does that change the process at all? Context here being, I'm working on a gargantuan blog. about our IPO listing day. What's the right process to make sure that we're optimizing that for maximum traction from an SEO standpoint? At what point in the content creation process do you want to be looped in? Because of the IPO nature of this, it's going to be heavily edited by legal. So it could be that some of the SEO things we do get undone by legal, depending on the order, who sees it first.
Yeah, so I know that that process is in place currently. So I think because the like if we were targeting a specific topic in a genre for a production schedule, then we'd map out the keywords so we don't cannibalize ourselves. So basically, we would ensure that each piece of content we produce is targeting a different term. So in order over a long term, what doesn't happen is we have 4 pieces of content that's dividing traffic between it, and only 1 piece of content is really converting. So what we want is all the traffic going to that page. So that's kind of one of the main priorities for mapping out the processes of what we tackle and why in terms of a cadence for production. If it's a one-off piece related to the IPO, I think it should be okay. But if you want, we could do like a quick bit of research on IPO related terminology. But I think people are going to be searching GitLab IPO anyway, so I think that in itself would probably give it a bit of traction. But there's no harm, I suppose, in maybe looking and just seeing if there is a provision of a few key terms or something that could be included in headers or subheaders. But I think because of the topic, it should be solid enough. But I'm happy to take a look and see what can be done in terms of that.
Got it. Okay. Thanks for that.
All right, excellent. Well, that is super informative, and it's going to help us a ton. Oh, go ahead.
I did have one more question, Niall. Have you worked with any other teams at GitLab where your team has given them advice on how to improve content, and then they worked with an agency or non-GitLab team member to improve it? And if so, did they use Google Docs and then a manual import into a merge request? Have you seen us give access to the GitLab project for the wider community to contribute to? What do you recommend there?
So we've worked with various teams in terms of SEO and content strategy. We're aligned very strongly with the content and editorial teams, for example, and we've done a number of other projects across primary marketing pages. But in my experience with that, I've never encountered us working with I'm not saying that isn't the case. It's just personally from my interactions, I have been involved in working with outsourced parties or what the processes are. But I would say that for information on that, the best person to touch base on would probably be Val, because I do know that I think they mentioned recently they did outsource for some articles. So I'm not sure what way they went about incorporating that into the pipeline structure, but she'd definitely have some answers on it.
Cool, thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, I reached out to Val yesterday about that, actually. So I think we've got some recommendations coming through. She said she's got somebody in mind. Cool. Well, thank you so much.
This was awesome.
Thanks
Thanks for setting it up, Jessica. Thanks, Niall, for the insights. We appreciate it.
Yeah,
No problem. If you want to set up something in terms of maybe a bi-weekly or once monthly, whatever you want to do, just so we can begin incorporating SEO into what you're doing, or at least informing the processes or answering any queries you have, like, I'm completely happy to do that as well.
Yeah, happy to do that too.
Awesome.
Cool. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks
Talk
all.
to you soon. Bye.
Bye.